Bill C-34 has been in the news lately with support for the efforts to protect children from online harm, but also with opposition due to the risk of limiting free speech. Christine Van Geyn joins us today. She's the Executive Director of CCF, the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Welcome to BCN, Christine. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Well, first of all, can you just let our viewers know a bit about what your organization is all about?
Yeah, so the Canadian Constitution Foundation is Canada's oldest and most effective pro-liberty legal charity. So we fight for fundamental freedoms and for Canada's Constitution in the courts of law and through public advocacy. So in pretty straightforward terms, that means we sue the government, the federal government, the provincial governments, and municipal governments when they violate the Constitution. And we either directly represent individuals whose rights have been affected by a government law or action, or we retain and pay for pro bono legal counsel for individuals who are affected. Sometimes we also intervene in cases to help courts understand the bigger picture of what's going on in a case.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you doing that work for us. Now, there are certainly many parents, I hear this a lot from coffee shop talk right here in Lethbridge, who really like the idea of the government banning children under the age of 16 from social media and from accessing porn sites, of course. Now, but there's also a duty for social media companies to remove content that sexually victimizes a child or re-victimizes a survivor. That's, again, understandable, I think, and intimate content communicated without consent. Those are all, I think, kind of no-brainers, right? But does it go beyond that? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so Bill C-34 is the Liberal government's latest attempt to regulate speech online, or as they put it, prevent harmful speech. The bill does a number of things. One of the big things it does is create something called the Digital Safety Commission, which would consist of 3 to 5 commissioners whose job is to police speech for all Canadians, and they'd be supported by what I can only assume is going to be a huge new bureaucracy. And the new commission would enforce a duty to act responsibly for social media companies, and that also includes AI chatbots, and it requires them to mitigate the risk that Canadians are exposed to harmful content. It also creates a duty to act responsibly, a duty to protect children for social media companies by keeping kids under the age of 16 off of social media. And it also creates a duty on social media companies to remove content that sexually victimizes a child or re-victimizes a survivor, and that removes what we refer to colloquially as revenge porn. So I think the last of those, there's really no objection that people have that from a civil liberties perspective. I think the problem we get into is this duty to act responsibly by mitigating harmful content. And harmful content is defined in Bill C-34 to include a number of things, some of which, I have no issue with requiring social media companies to remove, child pornography, revenge porn, terrorist content. But there's also content that it now will require social media companies to mitigate that's more subjective. Bullying content used to bully a child. That's not a hill I'm going to die on, but what I'm most concerned about is content that foments hatred, because hate content is inherently subjective. It's a very squishy term that a lot of judges, lawyers, police, and individuals struggle to understand the meaning of. And by requiring social media companies to remove content that foments hatred, we're going to end up with a chilling effect that has social media companies, out of fear of regulatory reprisal, will just have all kinds of content taken down preemptively, even if it doesn't reach that standard. So you're going to end up seeing a lot of content removed from social media that is just controversial or politically polarizing or rude. And that's frankly the stuff we just need to put up with when we live in a free society.
Yeah, it's a bad trade, isn't it? Okay, so nobody's feelings get hurt, but we take away your freedom to say what you want to say. I meet rude people all the time. I don't want them to go to jail for being rude or to be fined. This is just part of life, right? Practically speaking, so if somebody here, let's say a journalist from Bridge City News, says something controversial on a social media post, or a local, pastor or a politician or whatever, and so the social media police then, I guess I don't know how they handle this, how they enforce this, but they could be subject to a large fine, or would it be the actual social media company that gets fined? How does this work?
So, when you combine it with Bill C-9, which is the criminal bill on hate speech that just passed, that removes the good faith religious expression defense, I think you're at risk of seeing individuals who could be criminally charged for content under that's posted online under C-9, or in the case of C-34, internet companies who don't comply can face fines of up to $10 million or 3% of global revenue. And when you're talking about companies like Meta, Google, 3% of global revenue is obviously massive. And so they will have an incentive under C-34 when they'll be worried that these bureaucrats at the Digital Safety Commission will find some content foments hate, and they will err on the side of caution by taking down content that perhaps does not actually meet that standard. And that is outsourcing censorship through the threat of massive bureaucratic fines to private companies. And these private companies constitute the new public square in the digital world. And the government knows it cannot outright ban this type of speech, kind of offensive or unpopular speech, politically unpopular speech. They know they can't ban it outright under our Constitution. So they're creating this threat that hangs over the heads of these private companies and getting them to enforce it on their behalf. So if it's not constitutional for the government to do it directly, it's not constitutional for them to outsource it to these companies.
Yeah, this is an end run coming in through the back door, and we'll let the big high-tech companies, who are making all that money off of our backs, so they're the bad guys and they could do the dirty work. And the government gets off scot-free. That doesn't sit well with me.
No, of course it doesn't. I have a lot of concerns with C-34, with this fomenting hatred aspect to it. I think the government could improve the bill and make it more likely to pass constitutional scrutiny if it were just to remove, on the duty to act responsibly, the definition of hateful content, harmful content, if they just removed the fomenting hatred part of it. I think that would be more likely to help the bill pass constitutional muster. That said, there are other aspects of the bill that are a big risk, and that includes the duty to protect children by requiring social media companies to keep kids under the age of 16 off of social media. And look, I have 3 kids. I have social media. I don't think social media is good for me. And so I don't think it's great for my kids. I don't want my kids on social media. I understand why a lot of parents want the government to come in and say kids shouldn't be on this. The problem becomes how this actually gets implemented. And the government in C-34 hasn't told us that. I do not like using social media, but I still have it. And I don't want to have to upload my driver's license to go and scroll on X or to post once a month on Facebook. And I don't think most Canadians think that their privacy, they would feel very great about their own privacy if they had to upload a ID to use the internet, to scroll the internet. We have an interest in preserving a space of privacy in our lives. And if I don't want, a friend of mine seeing what my Google search history is, not because I look up anything, especially bad, but just because it's a little bit embarrassing. Like, what am I looking up? It gives a lot of insight into my own mind. If I don't want my friends seeing that, I certainly don't want Mark Carney seeing it.
That's a very good point. Yeah, we need to think this through step by step. What does this require?
We don't know what it requires right now. The government hasn't told us.
I mean, and that brings up a whole other question. Probably should do a separate interview on that. But I mean, is it the government's responsibility to keep our kids from accessing social media and bad content, or is it the parents' responsibility? I'm thinking maybe it's more the parents' responsibility, although, government can certainly play a part in this as well, I suppose. But
yes.
without
I think my kids should eat vegetables too. I think all kids should eat vegetables. But I don't want Mark Carney coming and sitting down at my kitchen table and telling me what to cook. There are a lot of things that are good for our families and for our children. And those things are our responsibilities as parents. Look, some parents might have a mature 15-year-old who they believe can handle some access to TikTok to promote dance videos that they do. Maybe they're in competitive dance and they want to do this. It's the parents' job to decide that, not the government. Not every kid is the same. Not every family is the same. And it's just not the role of government, aside from these age verification concerns that I have a lot of difficulty with.
Yeah, government makes bad. I mean, they're a poor substitute for real parents. I mean, they really are. Let's switch gears for a moment here. I also want to talk a bit about a recent property rights case that you guys are handling here. And this is just so bizarre. It's hard to believe it's happening here in Canada. Can you share the backstory of Daniel and Christine? I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name. Is it Rayo? I think they're from Port Colborne, Ontario.
Yeah, so they're actually from Mississauga, but they bought a retirement property in Port Colborne, which for your listeners out in Lethbridge, Port Colborne is a kind of small town surrounded by rural area on the shores of Lake Erie in Ontario. And the Rayo family, they bought a very small lot back in 2020. I've been out to the property. It's one of these kind of cottage type properties where all the homes are very close together. It's very modest. This is not a wealthy family. So they bought it to, with a plan to retire there. And their plan was actually to retire this year. Christine Rayo was supposed to retire this year. And their plan was to do a small renovation. They're going to keep the foundation of the house, but it was a bungalow, and they have kids and they want to one day have grandkids. So they thought, we're going to add a second story, bump the house out a little bit. But it's a very small lot, so it was not going to be a very big house. And in the process of doing this renovation, in 2024, they found human remains buried at the property. And as you're required by law, they reported this to the police, because when you find human remains, it obviously triggers a process. You have to make sure that this was not a missing person, this is not a murder victim. And the police came out and checked it out, and they said, no, these bones are about 1,000 years old. And that triggers a different process, which is an archaeological process. And the Rayos did exactly what the government told them to do, which is went through this whole regulatory process with the registrar for burial and cremation services in Ontario. And they went and got quotes for what this archaeological dig that is required by law would cost. And they got a number of different quotes, and the quotes are outrageous, just completely outrageous. The starting quotes were for $50,000 to $60,000 per week for 10 weeks, but open-ended. So you're starting at, $500,000, which the Rayos, I mean, they don't have
pocket change, right?
So there is a process for applying to the government for financial assistance, but they were denied. The government, the registrar who makes this decision said, you can take out a line of credit. I don't know who's going to give a $500,000 line of credit or more to a retirement age couple to renovate a small, not very valuable property out in the countryside. But yeah, like presumed that they would be able to get this line of credit, and that once they got it, they should be required to spend it all on doing this burial site investigation. And about 50% of the costs for this burial site investigation go to Indigenous consultation and engagement.
I mean, I'm guessing 100% of our viewing audience, thereabouts, would listen to this and go, duh, doesn't the government have, this should be the government's cost. This should be their bill. How can a private citizen be expected to fork over money for that? Absolutely ludicrous. So this legislation that's in place here, I think it's provincial. I mean, it needs to be overturned. And I think you have a petition that viewers can sign along those lines, right?
At the ccf.ca/buried costs. We're asking for people to help donate to judicially review this decision. We're fighting on behalf of the Rayos. And we're also asking the government to amend the legislation, because this is an undue financial burden on a family that simply can't afford it. I mean, who can? Who can afford that?
That's just, it's just, only the government could do something like that, right? Thanks so much for being with us today, Christine. Really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, very interesting, huh? Christine Van Geyn, the Executive Director of CCF, the Canadian Constitution Foundation.